Medical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
My name is Martha Rogers, and I want to thank you for letting us come into your living room this morning and to join us for this ethical discussion. Today's topic is medical marijuana. It's a hot topic. It's in Iowa, it's in the nation, it's all over the place. And as of April, 24 states were working with medical marijuana programs, and a 25th one was about to be implemented. And there's 16 other states like Iowa who have some cannabis extract laws. So 41 states in total are addressing this as far as action items and implementing programs. But Iowa is lagging way behind, and I hope we can explore what that means for us all and for some certain individuals with their situations in the medical field. Is it legal? Is it not legal? What's the core question? And I guess the core question for me is, should marijuana, cannabis oil, whatever the form is, which we'll learn about in a little while, should it be a medical option available in Iowa? We think it might be now, but there's a lot of ramifications. We have yet to learn about it. And I'm really excited to explore all of this with this morning's excellent panel. And let me introduce you to them now. Seated directly to my left is Dr. Andrew Peterson, a neurologist, and a volunteer, I think, with the Iowa Epilepsy Foundation also.
I am. I treat a lot of kids and adults with epilepsy, and I've known Dale and the Epilepsy People group community for a long time.
So glad to have you with us this morning. And seated to your left is Dale Todd, a parent advocate, a member of the Iowa Epilepsy Foundation Council, and well knowledgeable in this field from practical experience. Welcome.
Had to learn the ropes.
And to round out our panel this morning is Jerry Vander, Sanden, Lynn County Attorney, and I hope you'll be able to clarify some of the legal issues that are confusing me at least, and I'm sure many of our viewers. Let's start with some definitions. When we say marijuana, everybody has their own conception of what that is, and when we say medical marijuana, it sounds like our conceptions mixed with medicine. What are we talking about? What is medical marijuana, or what are the words, the components in Iowa?
In Iowa, the only thing that's been approved is CBD oil. So CBD is one of the compounds in the marijuana plant, which is fairly complex. It has no psychoactive components. There's no make you feel good or happy. You could smoke or drink tons of it. It wouldn't have any of those effects. It binds to receptors in the brain. It has been shown to be remarkably effective for some patients with really intractable epilepsy. There's a number of children who have what we call a seizure encephalopathy. They see so much they can't think straight, and they're profoundly impaired. Some of these kids fail all medications, and there's a group of these kids that responded really well to the CBD extract, which has led to a lot of the excitement and some new studies and so on.
So we're talking about the oil extract.
We're talking about a specific oil extract, primarily mostly a purified single component. It has bits of stuff in it, but it's primarily this one component.
And that's what Iowa's dealing with solely at this time.
Yeah, the other states you can use capsule form, patches, but here we took one small step and started with the oil.
So we're not talking weed or pot or whatever the words on the sheet. I'm showing my age now probably. But I'm really confused because when I talk to people, they say that there are laws that you can use it, but you can't get it, or you can't. Mr. Attorney, help me figure this out.
Well, as Dr. Peterson indicated earlier, in Iowa, what's approved for use that has some medical value is an oil extract from marijuana. It's not the kind of oil that has any kind of psychoactive properties. It's not going to get you high. And it's only approved for those that have just one condition, intractable epilepsy. And the process through which you have to go to get this cannabis oil is really convoluted. You have to get an approval from a neurologist who actually certifies you have the condition And then after you get the written certification, you've got to get also written approval from the Department of Public Health that then makes contact with the Department of Transportation that will issue you actually a permission, a license to obtain the oil. But the oil itself, the only oil that's approved for medical use in Iowa, is not available in Iowa. You've got to get it from another state. And many states that do have this product will not sell to a non-resident. So as a practical matter, the medical marijuana law that we have in Iowa helps very few.
Yeah, it's kind of null and void. It's not practical.
It's not. For those that have epilepsy, that are looking for some relief and looking for this certain kind of cannabinoid oil to help them with their condition, Iowa is not the place to live. It's just, you have to go somewhere else to obtain the oil if you want to use it to treat
So
your
what is the
condition.
legislature in Iowa doing about this?
3 years ago, when the bill was passed at about 2:30 in the morning, everybody involved realized that it was, the bill had some holes in it. And the agreement was that everybody was going to come back together during the summer through conference committee, make the tweaks to the legislation so that people could get access. That did not happen. The second year, the Senate passed a bill. It was not debated on the House side. It was not allowed to be brought to the floor, and nothing really happened 2 years ago. This year, unfortunately, the Senate passed a bill. There was no discussion. It was not allowed to get out of the Ways and Means subcommittee. House Republicans brought a bill forward in the last week of the legislature, 5:30 that day, with no input from Democrats or members of the advocacy committee, and that bill was dead on arrival. It failed that day. We've been able to look at models throughout the country and figure out what works and what doesn't work. This was a failure on the part of our public policy makers.
So proponents to support this use of the oil for seizure disorders really need to get contacting
Our parents have done an incredible job. These are parents that are dealing with complicated kids, complicated decisions of life and death. And they were at the Iowa legislature almost every day, along with other advocates. I don't get how somebody can be as non-compassionate as some legislators were to some of these parents. I don't understand that.
What are some of these prohibitions then stopping some of this discussion? I mean, this is a topic that hits a hot button for politics, for legal rules, for jail time, for medical needs, for disabilities and disorders.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it's a societal thing. Tobacco's very addictive. Nicotine's remarkably addictive. It's regulated. You can't sell it to someone under 18. They see high school kids smoking all the time. Alcohol is probably more addictive than marijuana is. And again, you're not supposed to drink if you're under 21. Used to be 18 when I was that age. But again, high school kids get access and so on, which I don't think they should be. Marijuana is illegal, not particularly addictive, doesn't particularly damage your lungs. Kids get access to it all the time anyway. I mean, a large percent of the population has smoked it or eaten a brownie or something in one way, shape, or form. But there's all this legal stuff about it's bad and things going on which cloud the issues with the medical side of it. And the medical side of it, a lot of it is anecdotal. Somebody's suffering, things aren't working, this stuff helps. And I go back to the height of the AIDS epidemic. When I was a resident in training, these people were dying, rapidly dying. And the drugs were in trial, and there's going to be years to go through trial. And so people started having buyers clubs. Go in Mexico, buy the meds, figure out the dosing, trial and error. And that's actually now an accepted part of drug development for people with terminal cancer. You know, sometimes you push ahead before you normally would because people are dying. And there's pros and cons to all that.
Well, and street weed that gets you high, that's handled in plastic baggies, is a lot separate and different than what we're talking about. We're talking
Right.
about, right now, at least in Iowa, an oil that doesn't get you high, that only benefits you medically if your seizure disordered at this point, is what I understand. So we're really confusing a lot of emotional issues here, aren't we, with past stigma?
I think so. There's the whole societal weed thing, and there's CBD oil, and there's other bits of medical marijuana. Like a lot of states have medical marijuana for chronic pain, for PTSD, for intractable anxiety disorders, people with weight loss and nausea from chemotherapy, glaucoma was the old standby. So there, for medical cannabis as a whole, has some applications. In Israel, it's used widely for various purposes. So there are countries where it's just not particularly an issue and is viewed as an agent that has helpful properties for different conditions. There's not a lot of research in the U.S. because of the hoops you have to jump through. There's 5 agencies involved in regulating it. You want to do research. And it's very difficult to get this stuff off the ground. I mean, but Pharma, you see Pharma had a study?
Yeah, GW Pharma has recently finished a phase 1 study with Dravet kids, 120 kids, 39% of them over a 12-week period of time showed a decrease in seizure activity. The preclinical, the clinical, and the anecdotal data is all showing that.
A remarkable decrease.
For some kids, it's an option, and it works. And that's all these parents are asking. They know the reality is that for some of them, it may not work. But we simply want that option. And so when we got the argument, well, there's no research, we would show the research. Well, the FDA hasn't approved it. We all know how slow the FDA can work. When some of these drugs, my son was on a drug for 5 years that the FDA hadn't approved. In fact, the reality is a lot of the medications that some of these tough kids are on, they have not been approved by the FDA. They're all in a phase, they're in a trial period of time. And so it was a failure on the part of our politicians to make a decision. And I think they fall back on the Schedule 1. We still equate marijuana. It's still in the same category with LSD, opiates, peyote, all these other hardcore serious drugs that end up posing a challenge to the criminal justice system.
So when you say Schedule 1, could you define what that is for those of us who aren't familiar with those terms?
Sure. Marijuana is considered a Schedule 1 controlled substance. That is, that there's high potential for abuse and there is no perceived medical value for treatment in marijuana. Now, I think that there'd be a lot of change, or it'd be easier to change some of the laws if marijuana was reclassified to a Schedule 2 controlled substance. But I think that part of the reason why the bill has become kind of a hot potato in the legislature and why they're taking kind of a slow approach to changing laws, which I think I approve of. I believe in that old adage, you look before you leap. And we don't want to experience what some of the other states have experienced when they approved medical marijuana laws. California was the first back in 1996, and you'll see now in many communities where you've got marijuana dispensaries on almost every street corner. It's become somewhat of a joke how easy it is to get. I know Iowa does not want to repeat those failures. In Iowa, I think we've taken kind of a slow and steady approach. We've been able to obtain some medical value, therapeutic value from an extract from marijuana that works, that has true medical value. And the debate right now, I think, is between some in the Senate that want to expand the application of that oil. They want to be permitted to treat other conditions. And there are some that are in the House that, as soon as you talk about medical marijuana, well, they're skittish about that because of the social stigma with marijuana. That it's been a controlled substance, it's been an illegal drug for so long, it's hard to talk about marijuana
and all
medicine,
the societal
right.
ills that come associated in some people's minds with it.
It's kind of like talking about liquor. There's one thing you call vodka, medical vodka. I mean, it's talking about an illegal drug in terms of having medical value. I think it's hard for people to get around to doing that.
Reminds me of prohibition in some ways, which
Yeah.
kind of didn't work.
It didn't work in a spectacular fashion.
Nor did the drug war.
No, right. But all prohibition did was earn a lot of money and create an upcoming criminal class. So the Al Capone, the big gangs, Boardwalk Empire is a big show on TV. That's all about the bootlegging. It didn't slow it down at all. Then everybody who partook of it was now criminalized. And the U.S. passed it and the U.S. took it away after a while. Marijuana in some ways is very similar. My understanding is there's no evidence supported as a gateway drug. The only evidence that supports that is the people who smoke marijuana are more likely to smoke cigarettes. People who smoke cigarettes are more likely to move on to other drugs because nicotine's profoundly addictive. So it's been more of this boogeyman associated with things with not a lot of data to back it up. And I think it's, again, a failed experiment, like the war on drugs, like a lot of things. It just hasn't worked.
And the good news is that we're starting now to get data from these states. And what you're seeing is where it has been decriminalized to a degree, the levels of usage among kids has not escalated at all. In fact, it seems to be the contrary. The gateway to drugs is no job, poverty, mental illness, those kind of,
Disabling
hopelessness,
conditions.
is what really drives people to, at least my experience, drives people to harder, avenues of self-medication.
So here's my heavy question. Are the leaders in Iowa, whether they're medical leaders, politicians, legislature, parents, are the leaders in Iowa acting ethically, in your opinions, by withholding the making of this cannabis oil in Iowa? I see some parallel things here. What's Iowa got to do? What do the people of Iowa and its leaders have to do? They have to work on the legislature, they have to work on decriminalization, and they have to work on the availability of that which is legal to have but we can't get.
Yeah, I think it's profoundly unethical and immoral what they've done. It's okay. There's not lots of data, but if you're going to go, if they're going to say this substance has promise, these people are desperate, kids are dying, they should be able to have this.
It's legal to use it.
It's legal. You have to have an avenue to get it. So make it illegal I've had families who had kids who went to Colorado to bring it back, and were stopped in towns because it's an illegal substance, and hefty fines.
By driving home, they were stopped.
Just by driving home, they were stopped. I mean, you have an out-of-state plate coming out of Colorado, and you're of a certain age, they stop you. Bring in a drug dog, find this stuff, and it's a hefty fine. If it's okay to have aspirin, you have to have somebody to produce aspirin, particularly if it's a potentially life-saving medication for people. So I think doing one without the other was profoundly short-sighted on the legislator's part. It was a compromise. I mean, the politics, Iowa's had a divided house politically, and it's been very difficult for years to get stuff accomplished. So it was a step in the right. I was surprised they made that step. It was a step in the right direction.
Yeah,
but
a beginning step, but
it
doesn't assist anybody at this point.
Not particularly.
Yeah, by refusing the ability to help some people, it really strikes me as it's bad public policy. The cost of the medical system, believe me, the most important thing you have to do, especially for kids with epilepsy, stop the seizures. If there's an option out there that makes sense, you have a moral obligation to try to do that. And to know that, we're studying it down here in the University of Iowa, and that doctor is actually having some results that are positive. People knew that. Unfortunately, it got bogged down in the politics. It's a slippery slope that we heard that a lot of times. And we were not talking about legalizing marijuana. Nobody was talking about that. But it got construed to be that's what we were talking about.
No, this is a narrow focus, a very narrow, single issue focus. Oil, not produced in Iowa, legal to have for people with epilepsy.
I understand and appreciate, though, our legislators' point of view, their difficulty with this issue, because what you're asking them to do is to legislate what has been for a long time regarded as an illegal drug to be used as medicine. And I can understand why there are a lot of legislators who are reluctant to go down that road and to authorize the use of something that's not been approved by the Food and Drug Administration for medical use. There are some extracts of marijuana that are approved by the Food and Drug Administration for treatment of certain illnesses. I think there's a substance called marinol, which is a synthetic extract from marijuana. It's been approved by the FDA. It's available for prescription in all 50 states. It's not perfect, but it's showed a lot of promise in addressing some of the conditions that sometimes people would seek marijuana for.
And in some of my readings this week to prepare for this, the marinol, those who are wanting the cannabis oil have tried, many of them have tried the marinol, and they were the unlucky few that it didn't help.
Oh, okay.
So there again, we have so much to learn, don't we?
And I mean, speaking as prescriber, it's a pain in the neck. I think I've given it to 2 people in 35 years. It's not easy to, there's a lot of hoops to jump through. And again, somewhat narrow application. And it's, I think the CBD oil, one step, clean that up, make it available, produce it locally, you know, get rid of the nonsense. That's one thing. Other aspects of medical marijuana, again, a more complicated issue. Legalizing marijuana, third issue. I mean, there's sort of three separate things. On the flip side, Iowa's great farmland. You want to help the state budget deficit. I think
it's already working in some places where the growth is growing and they have it. But all kidding aside, what would the average viewer today, listening to all of us, need to hear from you as far as what they can do? What can the average person do to support this to happen, or to, if they're opposed to it? You know, there's both sides of the issue. What do we leave with them?
Iowa politicians play doctor all the time. And by that I mean they impose themselves in ethical and medical decisions that they have no business being in. We look at this as a decision between a patient and their doctor, and we understand there's certainly some legal parameters, but this question has been worked out in already 24 states. I have confidence that we could do it here in Iowa.
I think we can too. I think people need to educate themselves, first of all, about the law, the way that it works in Iowa, because I think people would be surprised to see just how narrow a scope. And I think it's probably good public practice to start out small and to work in increments and not replicate the failures, I think, of other states that have adopted medical marijuana laws that I think are bad public policy and bad for public safety. I think there's a lot of evidence that marijuana itself is a harmful substance, but what has been approved for medical use in Iowa, it's an oil, it's not a harmful substance, it's got medical value, and we need to explore how to make it a more practical law for Iowans so they don't have to go elsewhere to get it.
Yeah. I would add, epilepsy, a lot of people is controllable. It can be a devastating disease. It kills people. Mm-hmm. I've had patients not wake up. I've had patients laying on their head, end up in the hospital with a hemorrhage. I've had patients on a ventilator for a week because we had to put them into general anesthesia to make the seizure stop. It causes a lot of issues. There's thinking issues. And if you have an ounce of compassion, these are the people we're talking about. We're trying to keep people from dying.
Well, and Dr. Andy, I used to teach special ed for 20 years, and it's not just the patient we're talking about. We're talking about the family unit, and the societal unit,
and the parents and the siblings.
The stress on the family,
it's huge.
The issues, the divisions within families because of the focus on one seizure situation. So, it's horrible.
It is horrible. So you have an ounce of compassion, you know who your legislators are, and you email them. And you send them letters, and you do that on a regular basis. And the legislators respond to public pressure. And if you get 10,000 emails saying, do this, and 100 against, well, it sways what they do a little bit. So it requires constant pressure from people who are involved and committed.
On the side of hope, is there any movement in Iowa towards the production of cannabis oil? Is that even a possibility, or is it something that
and
will always be out of state?
Part of the reason why we expanded the class of categories that could access medical marijuana is that you need a market. And you just can't rely on the 600 or 700
Yeah.
intractable epilepsy patients. You need enough to incentivize somebody to come to Iowa. Actually, they don't have to. I'm sure they would come. They're here. They would grow it. But that's part of the reason for the expansion.
Yeah.
And for us to look at maybe as Iowans accessing it where it exists already.
I think it's going to happen. There's still a lot of heavy lifting, but the majority of Iowans get it. The doctors are starting to get it. I was at a conference 3 weeks ago. Easily half the kids at the conference, medical cannabis is part of their medical regimen and has been for several years. And so I think it's just a matter of time.
And it's people like you that will help the movement keep going forward. We're so fortunate to have that.
I liked hearing some things from my county attorney today. I think there's a willingness to figure this out.
With regard to the cannabis oil, certainly I think we need to have a more workable law here in Iowa. I think towards the end of the session, the legislature was looking towards a possible partnership with Minnesota where it's available. I'm not sure. I mean, that measure
There was
did not-
nothing. There was nothing.
They didn't get very far
Yeah.
with that. But, I mean, it's an option I think that they're going to explore again. But they need to make the Iowa law workable.
Yeah.
Right. And the bottom line continues to be for me, is it ethical to withhold these possibilities? But the hope is there are things beginning to happen, not as fast as maybe some people would like to see them, but we have to take it a step at a time. And that's what I was known for, I think. Party comment, quick one.
I think like many things, I think we're seeing some clear utility for CBD oil. There's data which supports medical cannabis in a broader sense, which makes it easier for people to produce because it's expensive. I think there's a societal change afoot over time compared to when I was a teenager to teenagers now. The acceptance rate of this really should not be a big deal has gone up enormously. And I think it's one of those things that's going to change over time. I don't think there's easy answers to this. It's a complicated problem. It's tied up in a lot of political, societal issues.
And the need for the medication and the medical use is not only in epilepsy, is also a complicated issue because there are many out there. And it would be a blessing and a gift if they could get some ease, whether it's through medical marijuana or any other development in the medical field. Oh, we've learned a lot this morning. Thank you so much for being part of the panel. Final, last word.
I would just say that the parents of children and adults with epilepsy are the strongest people I've ever met. And they unfortunately learned that making good public policy in Iowa is not always a pretty story. But I have complete confidence in their ability to make this happen eventually because it's needed.
This medical oil we're talking about that has therapeutic value, I think if we took the term marijuana out of it, we get a lot further, a lot faster.
Yeah,
I think
agree.
that's the way to go.
I agree, and maybe that's the way to remind us all to live ethically. If you Google Iowa medical marijuana, you'll find a lot of resources online if you'd like to get involved or support this cause. I'm Martha Rogers, and on behalf of the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, I thank you for joining us, and I challenge you this week to remember to live ethically. Goodbye.